Good morning, everyone. How are you doing?
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
All right, we'll get rolling in just a second. Let me get everything pulled up. All right, got a whole bunch more people coming in. I'm going to go ahead and put the link for Poll Everywhere in the chat, in case you guys don't have it. We'll just do a couple of questions this morning, make sure we're comprehending chapter 4. So if you guys want to go ahead and get that pulled up, I will share my screen here in just 1 second. And we'll do some Poll Everywhere questions. All right, guys. So just first question for you is in one word or emoji, how is your semester going? I always like to see these responses. Oh, it's barely going. Okay. Peachy, I got that emoji. What's the cloud one? I don't know what that is. What is that right there?
It's a sigh.
Oh, got it. Okay. Cool, busy, productive, decent. Oh, is your semester organized? There's a lot of you actually saying that. That's cool. Awesome. Busy, busy. I kind of feel the same. It is definitely starting to pick up. I think everybody is kind of past that introductory material stuff, and we're now solidly into kind of the steep curve of every class. So, all right, cool. Well, this is better than I was anticipating, so that makes me feel a little bit better. So let's go ahead and go to the next question really quickly. So, and I'll go ahead and activate it. All right, so free Martinism in cattle is caused by which event? And you've got 4 choices here. Either A, fusion of the mesopharynx tubules to the root testes. B, absence of the SRY protein on the Y chromosome. C, failure of testes to descend during gestation. Or D, shared blood supply among male and female fetus. All right, so we'll give you about 30 more seconds here. $20 of us. Cool. All righty, guys, go ahead and get those last responses in. We'll shut it down. All righty. Okay, cool. So yes, the answer here was the shared blood supply among the male and female feti in gestation. So free Martinism can kind of be a little bit of a confusing event because it actually only happens in cattle. We don't see this in any other livestock species. And so when you have a set of twins and one is a male and one is a female, in gestation, the testosterone that is going to be produced by the male will actually cross the blood-brain barrier and desensitize or nullify the surge center in the female hypothalamus. And so we end up with an animal that is genetically female, but does not have the complete reproduction tract. So, all right, cool. One last question for you. All right, so inguinal hernias are more common in which species? So we'll give you guys about a minute.
While we're answering this one, Dr. Diatley, so just on the free Martinism, is it the destroying of the surge center, so to speak, or I can't remember what term used? Is that what causes her tract to not fully develop, or?
Yes, that's definitely part of it. It's kind of because that surge center is basically going to be desensitized in that female. She doesn't have any mechanism for estrogen to feed back to the brain. And so the lack of estradiol receptors won't even let the ovaries develop fully. Sometimes they'll develop, but they'll be really, really small and they'll have like no follicles or CLs on them.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right, cool, guys. We're going to go ahead and wrap up the response time on this question. So we'll lock it in here. Okay, cool. And swine. Yes, swine is the answer. We do see it every once in a while in cattle. I actually see this probably in 1 or 2 animals every spring when we brand and castrate calves. So you'll just have a testicle that doesn't descend the whole way. And so my sister, we've kind of designated her to be the castration person because she likes to do it very clean because she's a veterinarian. And so she'll spend some time to go up into the abdominal cavity, locate the testy that didn't descend, and then pull it down through that inguinal canal and castrate the animal. And so we see it a little bit in cattle, probably see it a little bit in goats, but this is actually a big issue with swine. And there's a genetic basis to it with swine, as you guys kind of work through in your production scenario. So cool. Okay, those were just some highlights of chapter 4. What I would like to do, I'm not sure I actually did that. Never mind. Is I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. If you guys have questions about chapter 4, I have a couple things that I just want to briefly go through that I'll share in a slide set here in just a second. But if you guys have questions, you can put them into the chat. You can either put them to everybody or just direct message me. I want to make sure we have a good handle on chapter 4 because you will see this information in chapter 4 actually come up again towards the end of this semester when we talk about the fertilization process and the beginning part of gestation, sexual differentiation, etc. So you'll see it again in chapters 14, I think. So All right, so as you guys are thinking on questions and stuff to roll into the chat, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen with you, and we'll just go through some announcements and stuff. And then I wanna look through some figures and kind of draw on some of those figures to make sure we're all on the same page. All right, there we go. So come on, buddy. All right, so as far as announcements, this week starts, or this week, week 5 starts the first of 2 weeks that we're going to spend on chapter 5, which is all about endocrinology. And so the layman's terms for endocrinology is hormone. And so the chapter 5 is really pretty dense and packed with a lot of material about a lot of different hormones. And so because reproduction is one of those mechanisms that will produce offspring for the next generation, it is a really tightly regulated process. And so that regulation comes from the really intricate hormonal interactions that take place. And so you guys can think of, or one way that I kind of describe it is that endocrinology and hormonal control of the reproductive process is a lot like California. It is super highly regulated, right? And so every gene that's upregulated, every steroid that is produced is going to have both a tissue of synthesis, so that's where it's made from, and then it's going to have a target tissue. And so that is going to be a lot of the context of this first week of chapter 5. And so during this first week, you guys will turn in a quiz that's already linked and uploaded on Blackboard. And I've actually seen a couple people have already worked through that. So, and then the following week is when we'll start talking in more detail about how hormones signal one another and how we produce hormones and those type of things. And so let me just make sure that everybody knows where we're at as far as Blackboard. Sorry, I must have shut that tab down. All right, so on Blackboard, underneath the Start Here module, we are down here in week number 5. You guys have a note guide, which is partial notes. There's a video from Khan Academy, which does a really good job describing the function of neurons, because we're not only dealing with hormones that are synthesized and secreted in the reproductive tract in the lower part of the animal's body, but we're also dealing with the hypothalamus and the pituitary. And so that neuron function becomes really important for that tightly regulated set of hormones that are going to signal to and be synthesized in the hypothalamus. And then you've got 3 kind of general overview lecture videos about endocrinology. And then we start jumping into the sources of these hormones. So where the hormones are actually made. I did put in a study guide down here. If you guys, it's not due, I mean, you could see these questions pop up in a quiz later on for sure, but this is a study guide to kind of help you work through this material. And then your first lecture quiz is due this Friday by end of day, so Friday the 26th. And then next week we'll dive a little more deeply into chapter 5. All right, so are we all set on what is due this week? Okay, a couple thumbs up, great, thank you. Okay, I'm gonna go back to the PowerPoint that I was just on. And hopefully bring some concepts together. from chapter 4, and part of it is going to feed into chapter 5. There we go. Okay. So with when we talk about the two endocrine tissues that are in and around the brain area, we're really talking about two very, very small but dense tissue organs, and so, or endocrine organs. And so when we talk about the hypothalamus and the pituitary, we're very much talking about this region here, which is a very small part of the lower brain. And the pituitary actually isn't even associated with the brain, with the anatomical structures of the brain. It's not technically a part of the brain, but it hangs directly below it. And it has transportation systems and neural systems that will feed into it. But it is a separate anatomical structure from the brain. When we look at this blown up, the hypothalamus sits in the lower part of the brain. And so over here on the right-hand side. And so this hypothalamus is where we're going to have millions and millions of neurons. And so for those of you guys that have either started on chapter 5 or have been through reproduction kind of at the 101 level, what is the main hormone regulator that is going to be synthesized or made in the hypothalamus? Any ideas? Okay, I've got a chat. So, ooh, sorry. So, go back. There we go. Okay, yes, it is GnRH. So, so GnRH is, and this is looking a little more into chapter 5 as well. GnRH is going to be a really small hormone. It's only 10 amino acids long. We call it a decapeptide. And peptide is the smallest version of a protein. And so this hormone, GnRH, is actually going to be synthesized in a GnRH neuron. And that is that guy there. So we have the kind of the cell body of GnRH here, where we're going to see lots of intracellular mechanisms like the nucleus and all the vascularization, as Golgi bodies, all of that stuff here in the cell body. And then in the axon portion, this is where GnRH is going to be stored. And it will be released from this, the dendrites down here at the bottom. And so, gosh, I cannot write today. Sorry, this is really hard to write on a tablet. And so there's going to be millions and millions of these GnRH neurons in the hypothalamus. And there's going to be lots of different hormones that actually feed back and regulate the synthesis and the secretion of GnRH. And so that could be some, like that could be estradiol. Okay, and so it has receptors here on the cell membrane of the cell body of GnRH. And so that's going to be, I just wanted to kind of give you guys an overview of where we're headed with endocrinology today, but and also just re-emphasize the importance that the hypothalamus is very much a different anatomical structure than the pituitary gland. And so that's why we spent some time in chapter 4 talking about how the pituitary gland actually was created. So the posterior pituitary gland here, let me clear all my annotation out. The posterior gland actually originated from the brain tissue. So it was developing by moving down during gestation. And then the anterior gland of the pituitary actually developed from the roof of the mouth during gestation. And so they ended up growing together. And the cool part about the posterior pituitary is that there we go. With that posterior pituitary, oh, come on, dude. It actually brought nerves and dendrites down with it. And it created this adenohypophyseal portal system. And so I'm just going to put portal system here. And so that portal system is how GnRH actually will get to the anterior side of the pituitary. But with the hormones that are going to be associated with the posterior side of the pituitary, there's actually nerve endings that start up here in the hypothalamus, but end down here in the posterior pituitary. And so these are things like oxytocin. And so the posterior pituitary itself doesn't secrete or doesn't synthesize or make any hormones. The hypothalamus actually does that, but the hormones are delivered or are secreted from the posterior pituitary into the blood system. All right, so on the anterior side of the pituitary here is where we associate a bunch of other hormones. So with the anterior side, oh, come on, buddy. This is where we're going to see LH and FSH be released into the blood system. And then we're also going to see hormones like estradiol, let's see here, estradiol, progesterone to some extent, not a huge extent, will feed back and help regulate the production of LH and FSH here. But the main hormone that is going to regulate these gonadotropins, LH and FSH, is actually GnRH, which is coming from the hypothalamus through the portal system. All right, so I don't know how clear that was. I can't write for anything today on this tablet, but I hope that gives you an overview of kind of where we're headed and the importance of the origin of the pituitary gland. So there's two very different tissues coming together to form that pituitary gland. So you're gonna hear me be very specific throughout the rest of the semester relative to the side of the pituitary gland. So the anterior pituitary gland is going to be producing things like LH and FSH, whereas the posterior side of the pituitary gland is going to be the site of secretion of things like oxytocin. And so hopefully that gives you a little more of an overview of the importance of these structures. All right. All right, so one other thing that I just want to make sure that we have a good handle on is during embryogenesis, while that fetus is developing, the after the testy has actually been created and developed, it has to actually move in the body cavity of that fetus to get to the correct location. And so we call that the descent of the testes. And so the testes will be formed up here in the kind of the abdominal cavity of the fetus. And once it is formed, it's going to be, one end of it is going to be attached to a piece of really elastic tissue that we call the gubernaculum. And so that gubernaculum is going to be very long and thin and stretched out. And as the testes begin to descend, the reason that we see the testes actually move from this position up here to this position here in the inguinal canal is because this gubernaculum goes through some really amazing growth. So it's going to get a lot wider and bigger and heavier. And so the combination of the weight of the growing gubernaculum along with the elasticity of that gubernaculum is going to pull the testes down through the inguinal canal here. And it's going to pull the individual testes through that canal. And so after that testes is through the canal in what will eventually become the scrotum, the gubernaculum, having done its job, will then shrink to a very small structure and will keep that testes kind of secured to the bottom part of the scrotum. And so again, with the production scenario, this whole process is governed by a lot of different things happening, right? So the testes has to be developed, the gubernaculum has to attach to the testes as well as to the base of the scrotum. It has to be really elastic in its makeup. It's then going to go through major growth, and which is going to allow it to pull the testes down, and then it's going to shrink back up. So there's lots of genetic signals that are taking place during this process. And so it makes sense that genetics could absolutely be a big issue for why this process doesn't happen correctly. And that's what we see specifically on the swine side, is that there are certain sire lines out there that have major issues with offspring having inguinal hernias. And that's where that testes just doesn't descend into the testicle correctly. What it will do is it will actually capture part of the small intestine and bring it through that inguinal canal with the testes. And so you have to be really, really careful with how you manage that. So are there any questions about this whole process of descending testicles? All righty. I think that is the last thing that I just wanted to go over. All right, well, that's kind of where we are jumping off from this week, is we're getting more into hormones. And so if you guys, we're going to spend 2 weeks getting through this material. If you have questions, please bring them, please email them to me, and we'll, because there's a lot of intricate things that are happening to each one of these hormones. And so that is all I had planned for today for us. I will hang out for a few more minutes to answer any questions that you may have. And if not, I will see you in a week.
I just had a few questions that were for this week, and I know you're going to go over it next Monday, but I guess because it's fresh in my mind, is it okay if I ask now?
Sure, go ahead.
So I was kind of confused about the oxytocin being produced in like the PVN, as that was like something I missed, and I guess I just didn't understand so how it's not synthesized there, but how I guess it travels there through those through that play. I thought that whole concept was hard for me to grasp, I guess.
Okay. I'm going to go back and share my screen. And we'll just go back to this pituitary gland picture. Okay, so with the oxytocin, it is also a neurohormone. Okay, so it's not very big, very similar to GnRH, and it is also going to be produced from cell bodies in the hypothalamus. The crazy part is about oxytocin is that the axon and the dendrites are both going to be associated with this posterior pituitary. So the hormone is going to be made up here in the cell body. Then it's going to be stored in the axon. And as soon as there's some sort of signal that oxytocin is needed, it's going to be dumped into the circulatory system. So the cool part about oxytocin is that signal is actually tactile. And so that's why in the beginning of the chapter 5 material, you actually look at the difference between a neural response versus a neuroendocrine response. And so when a calf, for example, is hungry, he's going to go up to the cow and start beating his head against the udder. And that tactile stimulation sends nervous signals back up to the brain that are received here in the hypothalamus, which allows all of this stored up oxytocin to be released into the blood system. And so, but it takes that tactile stimulation to actually make that whole process work. So oxytocin, as well as a few other hormones associated with posterior pituitary, are made from neurons that are associated with both the hypothalamus and the posterior pituitary. Does that help clear up any of that confusion?
Yeah, thank you. That was just the only part where when I was like looking at it or like thinking about it, I just was like not understanding, because it was like it's not produced in the hypothalamus, but it's produced from like a cell body within the hypothalamus, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so the hypothalamus, to get back to the PVN part of your question, is in fact, I should just go back to this. Yeah, so the PVN stands for the paraventricular nucleus. And so we know that there are certain areas associated with the hypothalamus. So the PVN might be like this part right here. So all of those oxytocin cell bodies are gonna be here in the paraventricular nucleus. And so
Okay.
there's going to be other parts of the hypothalamus as well. And so there's like the third ventricle and a whole bunch of other pieces of this. And so
Okay.
there's going to be, when we do hematology, we can actually go through into a brain. This is what I'm going to get off and nerd out for just a second. But what we can do is we can actually go in and harvest the hypothalamus of an individual. We can freeze it, and you can actually freeze it in like a block, because it's kind of in a block setting. And then you can go in and actually slice it very thinly, lay it out on a material and stain it for the specific cell neurons. So that's how we were able to identify that the neurons associated with with producing oxytocin were actually all in one area of the hypothalamus. And so they started calling that area the paraventricular nucleus. And then GnRH is going to be associated with multiple other parts of the hypothalamus as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that really helps. That was the only part where I felt a little lost on that. And like, kind of remembering that like some of the other ones, like when you talked about what was like what hormones were made in the placenta
Yep.
can also be made, in some other places too, not just in
Yeah.
the placenta.
Yep.
So that was,
Yeah, hormones are crazy. They can actually be synthesized from a bunch of different tissues. So it's
thank
nuts.
you.
Yeah, you bet.
I appreciate it.
Great question. Cool. Did anybody else have any questions? Alrighty, I guess not. So we'll go ahead and jump off, guys. Thank you so much. And we will see you next week.
Bye.
Bye. Hey, Mary, did you have a question?